Welcome to Lost Without Japan, a travel podcast about the life-changing experiences of exploring Japan and those moments we would be lost without. For your listening pleasure, allow me to introduce your very own Kanko Guido, Michael.
Welcome to a special Lost Without Moments bonus interview episode of the Lost Without Japan podcast. Our bi-weekly podcast is focused on getting you to Japan for your first visit or to make your next adventure to Japan even better than your last visit. Today's special interview episode offers a return of our first legitimate return guest from all the way back in season 1 with Peter, the host of Snow Country Stories and hiking guide Extraordinaire. He talked to us about snow monkeys and all sorts of things, in that area. And I couldn't wait to have him back on today. I truly, truly am a huge fan of his show and feel that he offers you, the listener, the opportunity to have something truly unforgettable and has some experiences in Japan that will last memories for a lifetime, no matter what time of year that you end up going to Japan. Don't let the word snow, dissuade you from reaching out, because it truly is all year long. This is your Kanko Guido for TKIC Studio Productions, coming to you with hopes and dreams for any listener who hasn't made it to Japan to do so. And I hope for you that is 2024, as well as for any of you looking to make that return trip to Japan, as I will myself this summer. I just want to thank you all for giving me a bit of your time today, and truly hope this podcast finds you in a good place or on the path to a better one, no matter how it may seem at this moment. My belief is that we can all use a beacon like this one to help guide us during these times, and my hope is that Japan, along with this show, will become that for you. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're returning Lost Without listener, thank you again for your time and for returning once more. And before I forget, I just want to let you know that we're going to add a little bit to this episode with one of Peter's episodes, not the full length, but a clip of it, so you can get an earful of Peter, even more than you would, and have that just urge that won't go away to click subscribe to his podcast and follow him on Instagram. Peter, thank you so much. Hope my opening wasn't too long, my friend.
No, Mike, thank you very much for having me on again. This is interview number 3, which is a real pleasure to be back.
I want to say just thank you again for setting aside time. We've been going back and forth, and we were even just talking podcast, fun before we even push play today.
So I just wanted, on that note, just to jump in, because last time we spoke, I wasn't podcasting myself. And a big part of the reason that I started was I actually really enjoyed the experience of speaking with you twice. And I had the thought before to start a podcast, but it was really that experience and talking to you that kind of pushed me over the edge to make the leap into it myself. So huge thank you.
Appreciate it, my friend. It's nice to have other people to commiserate with and just talk to, and just count as a friend. Looking forward to finally being able to meet in person this summer, my friend.
Yeah, I hope so. Let's make it happen.
But before we get going, me too. Like, before we get going too much into today's episode, where could listeners end up reaching out to you to follow your show, or just to reach out if they have questions, if they're looking to hire you as a guide, Peter?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I host a bi-weekly podcast called Snow Country Stories Japan. So the website is snowcountrystories.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X for the time being, but by searching Snow Country Stories Japan. Not sure how long I'm going to persist with X, because it doesn't seem like anyone uses it anymore. Website is probably the best resource. Lots of information there about the snow country, obviously all my podcast episodes, and additional information about my services as a guide and writer, and a bit more information about my background and who I am. So that's snowcountrystories.com.
Outstanding, my friend. And if since I may have listeners that are jumping in, midstream, haven't been from the beginning or during our talks earlier on, could you just give a brief little snippet about who you are?
Okay, big question to begin. So obviously, I've been living in Japan for quite some time, but very obviously, I'm not Japanese. Originally from Australia, from Melbourne, and I've been living in Japan for a number of years now. But in this area, based in Nagano. I've been in Nagano now for 6 or 7 years, and basically guiding that whole time. Being from Australia, from a young age, I was always interested in other cultures because I grew up in the '80s, and in Australia at that time. There was only, 4 TV channels. There was no cable TV, obviously no internet. There was no low-cost carriers. So going overseas was a big thing from Australia. So the rest of the world really felt a very long way away indeed. And so I was always really fascinated by other cultures. And so the first thing I did, when I finished school was go out and travel and got to explore parts of the world that I'd always dreamed of. That led me on to doing a Bachelor's of Archaeology at university, and then many years later followed that up with a Master of Cultural Heritage and Museum Studies. It's just kind of taking me down this path as a tour guide based here in Japan. But as mentioned, I've been back in Japan since around the beginning of 2016 and guiding since 2017. So that's kind of my motivation behind what I do. Really enjoy guiding, enjoy helping people discover Japan, fantastic culture, but especially the more interesting, probably less well-known elements of Japan. Again, another motivation of my podcast is not to talk about Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto. Very unlikely you hear about that on my podcast. My podcast is going to take you into the snow country regions of Japan to explore, what is a very different side of the culture.
And we kind of touched into this a little bit, but being the host of Snow Country Stories Japan, what can you tell me about, if I was coming in as a listener that I could expect to hear from following your show?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, it's a bi-weekly podcast focusing on life. And the byline is life and travel in Japan's legendary Yukiguni. So this word is important, Yukiguni. Yuki in Japanese means snow, guni means country. So it just translates as snow country. When people refer to the snow country in Japan, they're actually referring to a very large area. I think a lot of, especially international visitors or listeners, wouldn't be aware of this. It depends on how you define it, but up to 50% of Japan can be classified as snow country. So it's a huge portion of the Japanese landmass, but actually home to a very small portion of the population. It's only about 15% of the population. So it probably goes against what people know of Japan before they get here. The idea of big cities like Kyoto, Osaka, Tokyo. While there are a couple of decent-sized cities in the snow country, we're talking about a large part of Japan that's very sparsely populated, lots of mountains, lots of beautiful natural landscapes, and people carving out very different lives in this area. So in terms of the topics or the episodes you might expect to hear on the podcast, obviously it's going to revolve around snow, but as you already kindly pointed out for me, this is still, the snow country really is an all year round destination. So snow's on the ground, depending which part of the snow country we're talking about. Snow's on the ground anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6 months a year. But even when the snow is not there, it's an equally rewarding destination because, as I mentioned, those mountains, those national parks, they're just as large as they are in winter. The types of episodes that I cover, obviously skiing and snowboarding. Japan is home to a huge number of ski resorts and some world-class ski resorts, so we talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about different tour destinations in the snow country. I do my own travel guides for that, promoting some of my favorite destinations. I also talk about things like distilleries and breweries. They're always popular episodes. Property, in terms of buying property. You might be surprised to hear that foreigners can buy property in Japan. There's no restrictions on that. So buying property, renovating these beautiful old buildings, national parks, traditions, music, festivals, all these types of things. So it's pretty diverse. Occasionally, it's just me speaking in terms of travel guides or some other episodes. But more often than not, I'm interviewing somebody living and working in the snow country about what they're doing in a hope that I can attract people to visit and possibly to choose to come and live here.
I have to tell you, Peter, your episode, we were talking about like the rehabbing of the homes and talking to people that were, as passionate about it as, you are, that are going through this process and, what it meant to them. was such a cool episode to listen to have like not just reading something online that this is a possibility, something I could do, but actually hearing firsthand from somebody that's living it was just outstanding. And it almost leads into kind of like a culture of this snow country and the people that choose to live there. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, firstly, I guess let me just take a step back because I think it's probably important to kind of clearly point out where it is, because this question comes up a lot on with my podcast, is exactly which areas are you talking about? So as I mentioned, in its broadest sense, snow country can refer to up to 50% of the Japanese landmass, so quite a lot, but it really depends on how you define it, and different people define it differently depending on what they need. But the simplest way, if you look at a map of Japan, the large main island is called Honshu. Just stick your finger right in the middle of that, and that's basically Nagano, where I am, and that's where the Japanese Alps, the largest mountains of Japan, are. And then run your finger more or less up the north coast towards Hokkaido. That area is the snow country, with a couple of other areas, some surprising areas to the south that actually also receive heavy snow. So that accounts for up to 50% of the Japanese landmass. But as I mentioned, it depends on why you're using the term and how you're using it. So in its classic sense, when people refer to snow country, they're referring to a much smaller area. And that's really, if you, again, put your finger in the middle of the map, just take it up to the north. That area around what is Niigata, Toyama, Ishikawa, Fukui, a lot of people consider that the classic snow country. So it just really depends. In terms of culture, again, it depends on exactly which area. Because some areas, they receive huge snow, so life there is dictated traditionally by that snow, and even today with the introduction of modern machinery and infrastructure, which makes life a little bit easier, the snow still dominates life there, even when it's not on the ground. So, for example, if you look at an area around Niigata, where I first lived in Japan, that receives the towns and villages there receive a huge amount of snow. And so that they're likely to have snow on the ground anytime from November to December through to April or May. And with the heaviest snow, usually in January, February, March, when traditionally, 2-story houses, even 3-story houses could get totally encased in snow. So obviously the lifestyle is designed around dealing with that. And even when the snow is not on the ground, it still dictates life all year round because of the snow is there so long. It means it's a much shorter spring, summer, and autumn in those areas, much shorter growing seasons. These are agricultural areas. So they can only, for example, produce one harvest of rice rather than 2, as you can in the south per year. And so things like this. So around that, very distinct culture, traditions, mythology has grown up. And these are all things that we explore on the podcast. Historically, these were really seen as the back end of nowhere, the snow country. There was no reason to go there, especially in winter. And Japanese almost kind of felt sorry for people that lived there. I think it's starting to change now. I mean, it still is a very tough place to live at times, but very beautiful. And I think more and more people are interested in exploring it. And certainly I want to encourage those international visitors that are heading here, get out of the cities and come up here. Actually, only a relatively small percentage of international visitors leave the cities. But like all countries, I think the real heart and soul of a country is outside the city in the country. So I hope that through speaking with you today, Mike, and also my podcast, I hope we can get people out here.
100% agree. There's so much the country has to offer. And one question I get a lot is, when is Japan's snow season? And I know you're the person to speak to this, Peter.
Yeah. Well, right now is the beginning. So it looks like, for example, this year we're going to get a nice early season. We've already had snow here in Nagano. The mountains are already filling up and some of the higher areas of the ski resorts are starting to open. So that's fantastic. Typically, you can expect snow anytime from mid-November through to end of March, mid-April. But if you go further to the north in Hokkaido, that's the most northern island of Japan, they have an even longer season. So typically, around that time, if you're looking to come here primarily for the snow and you want to be certain you're going to have it, anytime from around end of December through to early March, there should be lots of snow, especially if you're coming to ski or snowboard. That's probably the best time. The heaviest snowfall typically in January and February.
Outstanding. And with Japan's snow season, like you said, it's typically that November, December through March, perhaps a bit longer in the higher in northern areas. But can visitors coming in spring still have that opportunity to visit snow?
Yeah, they can. And this is the surprising thing for a lot of visitors because some of the most popular, or let's say iconic destinations in the snow country are actually only accessible in spring. So, Japan, as I mentioned, receives some of the heaviest snowfall of any habituated areas in the world. Really does receive a massive amount of snow. And as a result of that snow, because there is so much, some of those areas aren't accessible until the spring. And I think we're going to go into those today, a couple of my recommendations. In terms of if you're coming for skiing and snowboarding, yeah, I mean, if you go to the resorts in Hokkaido or, for example, here in Nagano, Shikokogen, which is Japan's largest and highest ski resort, a lot of people don't realize most ski resorts, especially certainly in central Japan, will close around mid to March to end of March, early April, regardless of how much snow they have left. It's very Japanese. This is the date that we close, we're closing, even if there's still 3 or 4 meters on the ground. Shikokogen goes much longer. Because of Shiga's altitude, the highest ski resort in Japan, its season goes to the end of April or into May. And so you can come here in central Japan and go skiing in April and May, and also in Hokkaido. There's some areas up there that you can keep going. So certainly in spring, you should still be, if it's a priority, you can still find a good amount of snow. We're going to go into a couple of destinations where there's still a huge amount of snow in spring.
Outstanding, my friend. And you have to apologize on my pronunciations for some of the areas that I'm going to bring up. You feel free to correct me. I always, throw out there, I'm here to bring you things to do. And give you a Google map to go with it because my pronunciation may not always be there, but it's improving sometimes.
Let me tell you, mate. If you're going to an Australian for tips on pronunciation, you're in trouble.
Explains so much about why we get along so well. That's but I do love the topic though with spring activities in snow country, and I know that there is in Tateyama, it's like Kurobi Alpine Route as one that I've at least seen. Where is it? What is it? You're like, when is it open? What can you tell us about that?
Sure. Okay, let's jump into that. So you're correct to stumble on the pronunciation of that one because actually the Japanese, it's referred to as the Tateyama Kurobe Alpine route, as in the I believe the French word. But in English, we'd say the Tateyama Kurobe Alpine route. While your listeners may not have heard of it, there's a good chance they might have seen photographs of it, and we'll come to this. So the Tateyama Kurobe Alpine route is a series of mountain transports that takes you over Japan's highest mountain range. Obviously, Fuji is Japan's highest mountain, but Fuji sits by itself. It's not part of a mountain range. Japan's highest mountain range, often referred to as the North Alps, or is actually called the Hida Mountains in Japan, that runs through Nagano up to the north, up into Toyama. And so the Tateyama Kurobe Alpine route is a series of transports that goes from the Nagano side of the mountains to near the summit, and then comes down to the Toyama side of the mountains. From on the Nagano side, Ogizawa Station is the base station, and it takes you down to Tateyama on the other side. The top station of the Tateyama Kurobe Alpine route is called Murudo, and it's at a height of 2,450 meters, which I wrote down here because I'm sure a lot of your listeners deal in feet. So 2,450 meters is 8,038 feet. It puts you within striking distance of the summit of Mount Tateyama. Mount Tateyama is 3,003 meters or 9,852 feet. And Tateyama is considered one of Japan's 3 most sacred mountains. Probably no surprise to hear one of the other 2 is Fuji, and the other mountain is called Hakusan, which is over in Ishikawa. So these mountain transports take you up to the top station, and then you can choose to, for example, go up from the Nagano side and come down the Nagano side, or come up from the Toyama side and go down the Toyama side, or you can cross from Nagano to Toyama or to Toyama to Nagano. And so from the Nagano side, it can be kind of confusing to get your head around it before you go up there. It's a series of transports that was originally put in to build the dam up there. There's a very large dam up there. Certainly, it's Japan's highest dam. I think it might be the largest as well. Don't quote me on that. Called Kurobe Dam. And so these transports were actually originally up there to create the dam. So it gives you an idea of what to expect. It's pretty rugged and ready to get you up there. So from the Nagano side, you take a tunnel bus, an electric tunnel bus literally through the guts of the mountain. It's pretty incredible. Before you get onto a cable car that takes you up to a ropeway. That ropeway takes you even further up to yet another tunnel bus that leads you up to the top station. From the Toyama side, a little bit less exciting. So I really like going up from the Nagano side. The Toyama side, you take, again, a cable car up to a mid station where then there's a bus which drives a road up the mountain, which is very beautiful, but not quite as exciting as the Nagano side. The big draw card and the things that people might have seen, your listeners might have seen, is the snow walls of Tateyama. Important to say, actually, Tateyama doesn't open to the public until April 15th each year. It's closed through winter because there's too much snow to get up there. So it opens from April 15th and remains open typically until the end of November each year when the snow comes again. So upon opening, the really famous site in Tateyama is the snow walls. So each spring, some much tougher people than me go up and carve the walls through the snow. And this is where you might have seen photographs of large coaches, huge buses, dwarfed by this tunnel of snow that they're driving through. So those snow walls can be up to 18, 19, I've even been told 20 meters in height. So that would be around 60 feet. And so this is the really famous site in Tateyama. Snow walls are at their best from April until probably early June when the warming weather starts to melt them. But then as that snow recedes, you have these fantastic hiking trails that open up in the North Alps that will take you up to the summit of Tateyama, very easy walk, or take you right into the national park. There's lots of very high mountains in there. It's a really fantastic destination and something you can only access from spring onwards.
Outstanding, my friend. And is that something, besides covering, in your podcast, like area and things like that, is that something that you act as a guide as well?
Yeah, I do. So I haven't covered it yet directly. I have mentioned it in the podcast. Sometime early next year, I'll be doing a travel guide dedicated to Tateyama Kurobe to provide everything you need to know to plan your visit. Yes, I do. As the information will include in that travel guide, if someone's interested in a tour, I can certainly guide there. I've guided many times before. One of my favorite destinations. As a guide, it's an easy one to guide because I just know my guests are going to love it. So it's certainly something I can do. Prior to me publishing that travel guide, if any listener is interested in my services, please just contact me through the Snow Country Stories Japan website, and we can have a chat about what's possible.
Your website is outstanding. I was looking through it again recently, and you put a lot of effort into it, my friend. There's a lot to see there, and it can be something to strive for one day. So it's great. It's great.
One thing to mention with Tateyama Kurobe, it's a bit expensive. So, sorry to jump in there again, Mike. It is a bit expensive. So, for example, if you're going to come up from the Nagano side and down the Nagano side, the ticket's around 10,000 yen. So I think that's around, in US dollars, maybe $80, which probably doesn't sound that much. But in terms of Japanese pricing, it's a little bit expensive. Obviously, when you get there, you'll see the amount of work that would go into maintaining all the transports up and down. I should also mention it's extremely popular with both Japanese and international visitors. So, and obviously, the earlier you go, the more popular it's going to be. So the Tateyama Kurobe Alpine Route opens, as I mentioned, April 15th. Not long after that, you have Japan's run of public holidays called Golden Week, which is typically in late April to early May. It changes through the year. And so it's very easy to find out when the public holidays are. Just Google search, Golden Week 2024, Golden Week 2025. It'll tell you the dates. Don't go on those days. It'll be super busy. And then also avoid weekends. It's going to be busy. It doesn't matter when you go. But if you go on the public holidays, especially around Golden Week or on the weekends, especially at the start of the season when people want to see the snow walls, it's ridiculously busy. So weekdays and avoid public holidays.
Love it, my friend. How about the area of Kamakochi? Where is that? And what is it in regards to area?
It's another good question. So Kamakochi is the second of my recommendations for spring and snow, where Tateyama Kurobe Alpine Route will actually take you into the snow and you can walk around the snowfields. Kamakochi is a little bit different. It's just going to take you to have some fantastic views of snow. So Kamakochi is also part of the same national park that Tateyama Kurobe is in, but further to the south. So it's around a 2.5 hour drive from Nagano City, or an hour to an hour and a half from Matsumoto. And just like Tateyama Kurobe, you can approach it from either side of the mountain range. It's in the same mountain range, the Hida Mountains. So you can either go across from Matsumoto, which is the largest city on the eastern side of the mountains, or you can come across from Takayama on the western side of the mountains. There's, again, a good chance that listeners might have heard of Takayama. It's got the very famous old town, very beautiful old town center, and very close to the World Heritage villages of Shirakawa-go. So Kamikochi sits in the mountains between Matsumoto and Takayama. And to get there, it can be a little bit confusing when you haven't done it before, but it's actually very simple. So you can't drive yourself into Kamikochi. Kamikochi is part of Chubusungaku National Park, but it's a special protected zone within that national park. So private vehicles are not allowed in, meaning the only way you can get in there is on large tour buses, public coaches, taxis, or private transport. If you were to book, a private charter for yourself, something like this. Just like Tateyama Kurobe, because of the amount of snow in the mountains, Kamikochi doesn't open until April 15th every year. And it runs through to November, but it closes a little bit earlier than Tateyama Kurobe. It closes on November 15th each year. So Kamikochi itself is an alpine valley located around, it varies depending which part of the valley you're in. It's located around 1,500 meters above sea level, which is around just shy of 5,000 feet. And it's 16 kilometers long, which I think is about 10 miles. And so it runs from two mountains. And the very famous one of the mountains that it takes you towards is called Hotaka. Hotaka is Japan's third highest mountain. Hotaka is 3,190 meters in height, which is 10,465 feet. Keep in mind that the second highest mountain in Japan is only 3 meters taller. So effectively, that's called Hotaka, the equal second. And so Hotaka is very famous. It's a triple peak mountain, very beautiful. And that, upon opening in April, there'll still be a bit of snow in the valley that you walk along, but the mountain will be covered in snow. So it's spectacular. So the valley runs for about 16 kilometers. It follows the Azusa River, very beautiful, very azure river flowing down from the mountain where the snow melts. And it's just one of the most beautiful destinations I've ever been to in Japan. It's another one that when I take my guests there, it's very easy as the guide because I could literally say nothing and they're going to love it. Now, I think I have a lot to say, so I think I enhance the experience. But this is why definitely Kamikochi is certainly the second of my recommendations for spring destinations in the snow country.
Outstanding, my friend. And one of these I've definitely, we've talked about before, and I know that you spoke on your podcast about it as well. The Shiga Kogen Ski Resort. Could you tell our audience again, just, where it's at and why, if they've not heard of it, or even if they have heard of it, why it's worth visiting?
Yep. Love to. I love talking Shiga. Just before we move on from Kamikochi, I should also mention, Mike, that I'm going to do also a travel guide for Kamikochi sometime next year to time with it opening in April. So look out for that. There'll be everything you need to know. And again, some information about my services. Shiga Kogen, I actually have done an episode about already. So if you were to visit the Snow Country Stories Japan website, episode 13 of the podcast is all about Shiga Kogen. And so very happy to talk about it. Shiga Kogen is Japan's largest and highest ski resort. So it's in Nagano. When people hear that, they're often surprised because there are other ski resorts in Japan that have a higher profile with international visitors that also claim to be the largest. Notably Niseko, which is in Hokkaido, and the resorts of Hakuba Valley that are in Nagano. You might also see them claiming to be the largest. It's actually Shiga is the largest. So I cover, we go into that discussion in the episode as to just to back that up, that it is actually the largest. The Shiga is located from I think around off the top of my head 1,330 meters to 2,307. So it has the highest chairlifted ski run of any official resort in Japan. There is one other higher chairlift in Japan for a ski resort, but it's very small. So in terms of a major resort, this is the highest. Because it's the highest, it also has the longest ski season in Nagano. So most Nagano ski resorts will be open in a good season, sometime from mid-December, maybe second half of December, through to the end of April, possibly go a little bit later. Shiga, because of its altitude, is open from usually parts of it will be open from mid to the end of November, well through April and into May. It just depends on the season. The official season for Shiga is also mid-December through to mid-March, but they keep going after that. They just don't tend to advertise it much. So Shiga is a place that if you were to come here in April, for example, because of the altitude, you're almost guaranteed to have excellent snow up there. Shiga Kogen is above the Snow Monkey Park. So if you were to drive maybe 20 minutes past the Snow Monkey Park, I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of that, you're going to hit the lower runs of Shiga Kogen. So you can go there and ski, well into April and if not May. The great thing about doing that as well is that the crowds really drop off. So certainly there'll be very few international visitors at that time. Japanese have really kind of also switched that part of their brain off. So, it's going to be very quiet, likely to be mostly locals. And if you go on a weekday, it'll be exceptionally quiet. So some of the best snowboarding experiences of my life have been in Shiga midweek in April, where the snow is still fantastic, huge amount, fantastic quality, nobody there. It's a massive resort, really worth enjoying. The other great thing for international visitors is that accommodation in Shiga, once you get into May, especially midweek, it's going to be exceptionally cheap. You can be able to find some fantastic hotels that give you a great deal because if they don't have anyone coming. A bit different to, I should mention, the accommodation situation in Tateyama Kurobe and Kamikochi. There is accommodation at the top of Tateyama Kurobe Alpine Route. It's expensive because there's a couple of hotels up there. There's a couple of mountain lodges if you're actually going to go hiking, which are, they're Japanese. They're comfortable. They're really good. There's onsen and everything up there. But the hotels are expensive. The hotels in Kamikochi are crazy expensive. And they're very comfortable, but you're going to be really paying for them. Shiga Kogen in the peak season is going to be expensive around, obviously, Christmas, New Year, weekends through January. But once you hit April, as I said, the hotels don't have enough people to fill them. So you can get some really, really good deals. So Shiga Kogen is my recommendation. If you want to actually do something with the snow, head up to Shiga and you'll have a great time.
And is this something, too, that you lead groups to as well through your guide service?
I don't. So I'm a snowboarder, but I don't lead snowboarding tours. It's something which I think there's plenty of really highly qualified snow and ski instructors and guides. And I'm confident looking after myself. I'm not certified to be looking after anyone else. So no, I don't lead snowboard tours, but have a listen to that episode. In the episode, that I did about Shiga Kogen, I speak with a guy by the name of Rebel Zimikiel, really interesting guy. He's a two-time Olympian, originally from Ethiopia. He represented Ethiopia twice at the Olympic Games, and then grew up in the United States, so you hear American accent, but originally from Ethiopia. He is the manager of Shiga Kogen International Ski School. So they offer guided tours, including, if you would like, backcountry, if you're interested in side and backcountry at Shiga. Obviously, you want to go with somebody who really knows what they're doing, knows where to take you, where it's safe, has all the appropriate gear. They can cover that. But also, given the size of Shiga Kogen, not only do they do ski and snowboard lessons, both group and private, and obviously in English, they lead tours. So you can hire a guide to take you around and like give you this kind of curated day trip around Shiga Kogen so you get the most out of your time. It's a massive resort. So, if you really don't know where you're going, you can kind of get a bit lost, or maybe if you're only going to do a day or two there, you won't see half of what's on offer. So they provide those tours, and I would certainly recommend checking them out. So have a listen to that episode, and if you're interested, get in contact with Rebel, a really lovely guy.
Outstanding, my friend. If you want, we can include a link for him as well, like just in our show notes. And, just if anybody's listening, in regards to that, be happy to pass that along as well. For your podcast, my friend, what is coming up on Snow Country Stories Japan? I know you've hinted at a little bit, but what else can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, obviously we're moving into winter. The podcast is called Snow Country Stories Japan, so a lot of the focus right now is on the snow. So we've been doing some episodes recently on the ski resorts, and not just focusing on the really famous ski resorts of Japan, but also some of the less known but really worthwhile ski resorts. So there'll be more episodes coming up about that. As I mentioned, doing some travel guides, and I have some more coming up about some interesting destinations. We always talk a lot of breweries and distilleries, so there's more of those coming up. And we're going to start kind of branching out into some more interesting aspects of culture in the snow country. As I mentioned, it's quite different to what you would kind of term or consider the lowland parts of Japan. Lowland parts of Japan, yeah, Tokyo, Kyoto, this. The further you move north, the more different the things become. And so we're going to start exploring some more aspects of that and things that people may not have heard of, especially as we move up north to areas like Akita, Aomori, Hokkaido, and the kind of ethnically and culturally distinct people, the Ainu, which maybe many people haven't heard of. Japan is a very homogenous society, but they aren't the only people in Japan. So we're going to start exploring things like that and the difference with those cultures, which I think, it takes me into areas that I am learning a lot, which is going to be great. But there's a lot coming on. And then as we move out of the winter into the next spring and summer, large focus on, as I said, mentioned areas like Tateyama, Kamikochi that are only accessible in spring. Going to start looking at the national parks more. Japan is home to a huge number, I shouldn't say huge number, a good number of national parks, just like both the countries we're from, United States and Australia, both blessed with fantastic national parks. But unlike the United States and Australia, where it might take you a day to get to the national park because it's very far away, in Japan, because of the transport system is so good, you can get to the national parks typically really fast. So they're very accessible. You're going to see the Japanese government promoting them more now, actually, increasingly. So we're going to start talking national parks. We'll do some festivals. Obviously, summer means big festivals in Japan, including music festivals. A lot of those are held in the snow country because a lot of them revolve around the ski resorts. So we're going to start looking at those and hopefully lots of things that I haven't even thought of yet.
It's crazy how that happens. You start researching down a rabbit hole and find something that's just, amazing. You know what I mean? Like something that you didn't know even, know existed, and it takes you in a different route. So I look forward to it. I know I've no doubt about it. Listeners will as well. If anyone listening right now would like to get in touch with you about your guiding, how can they end up doing so?
Best way is through the website. As I mentioned, the website is snowcountrystories.com. There's a contact page on the website. Feel free to do that. I'd love to hear from people. Even if I can just answer some general questions for you. Obviously, it'd be great if you want to book with me. But I really genuinely want people to come to this area. So I'm always happy to answer questions to help people access and find the best way to do things. If you were to contact me through the social media, Instagram is Instagram, Facebook, and X. Instagram would probably be the one that I look at the most. So that would be another one. I always endeavor to get back to people as soon as I can. Just bear with me. If I am out guiding on a stretch of days in a row, it potentially might take me, a day or two to get back to you. But if I see it, I'm going to reply. So feel free to either the website, Instagram, or Facebook. But with the website being they're probably the best.
Outstanding, my friend. And one thing I always like to kind of round out with before we, say goodbye and kind of introduce that the clip of episode of your show for everyone that's listening today. Is there anything else about your show that you'd like to share with listeners that we haven't discussed to this point? And that could go for the guide work you do as well, my friend.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So the clip you're going to hear is from an episode I did. It's a travel guide, so it's just me. I'm not interviewing in this one. A travel guide to a place called Togashi in Nagano. So it's very near to where I live, an area that I go to myself often. I've guided there many times. Another place I'd love to take my guests because they always love it. And Togashi is an interesting one because Togashi is home to some of the most important Shinto shrines in Japan. And they're closely related to the creation myths of Japan itself. And the episode that you're going to hear, you're going to hear the beginning of it, gives you a indication of why Togashi is so important. And it may be a flavor of a little bit of what my tours are like in terms of my storytelling. And I guess this is the point that I want to make. I think a lot of what's said about Japan is actually often quite lazy and inaccurate. I think there's a lot of myth. All countries build up their own myth about what they are and who they are. And I think that as Westerners, for example, I imagine a lot of your listeners, Mike, are in Western countries. I think Western media perpetuates that myth a lot and just repeats the same kind of lazy, tired statements about Japan that aren't necessarily that accurate. So I'd like to challenge people a little bit about things, about what they think is Japanese or not Japanese, because like all cultures, Japan, I think Japanese will often tell you that they are unique and different to everyone else. Now, they're unique in the sense that all cultures are unique. But Japan, like every other culture, borrows and blends and steals from everyone else. It's something that I'd like to explore in my tours, to really challenge people to say, well, yes, this has been refined to be Japanese, but originally it's from India, it's from China, it's from Western countries, which might surprise people how often the West has influenced Japan, for a long time. And so I think something about where I like to take my guest in with Togashi in particular and explore Japan's Shinto culture is that, Japan has this odd relationship with religion where most Japanese subscribe to both Buddhism and Shintoism. They have two religions at one time. There's a whole reason for that, which I go into on my tours. But I always say to my guests, and this is just my observation, if you want to understand the Japanese mind, that's Buddhist. If you want to understand the Japanese heart, that's Shinto. So I think if you really want to kind of, drill down to the core of what being Japanese, you've got to get into Shintoism and have a look at that. And a lot of Shintoism is all about nature worship. And so obviously the best places to experience that, and therefore the most sacred places, are outside of the cities, typically in the mountains. And so this is something I'd like to get across with my podcast. I certainly talk to my tour guests about that the mountains here in the snow country are just as big outside of winter. So this is an all year round destination. And I think by coming here, you really get to the core of what being Japanese. 70% of Japan is classified as mountainous or rugged. Again, a lot of people would be surprised to hear that, because I think in their minds, Japan is these big metropolises, which it is. It's got these huge cities, but most of the country is not like that. Most of it is mountainous, and most of it has a very different lifestyle, very much more traditional lifestyle to what you'd experience in the city. So hopefully you can discover that through my podcast, or if you want to come out here and risk spending a day or two with me and let me show you around, I'd love to do so.
Outstanding, my friend. And one that I'm just going to give a shout out to, and we kind of glanced upon it, was your 6th episode with the Shiga Kogen Brewery and the artistry of barrel-aged beer. That was fantastic. I want to say that I've listened to that one more than once, and it's nice to see that you already have more than 20 episodes, and by the time this come out, that might be closer to 30. Not to date our episode already, but there's a lot that is there. So I would, just definitely say it's worth checking out, my friends.
Yeah, thank you for that plug, Mike, because I've done a couple now on the on distilleries and breweries, and there'll be more, because there's the one about Shiga Kogen, which is one of the highest profile breweries in the snow country in Japan. It's an award-winning brewery. It won Brewery of the Year twice in Japan. And they're doing these barrel-aged beers based on the Belgian tradition, one of the few breweries in Japan to be doing that. I've also done an episode about Nozawa Onsen. Nozawa Onsen is a very famous hot spring and ski resort town here in Nagano. A relatively new gin and whiskey distillery that have already cleaned up a bunch of awards for their gin internationally and in Japan. Whiskey is not on sale yet, but it will be shortly. No doubt they're going to do that. And a more recent one with a really fantastic cider brewery here in Nagano called Son of the Smith, which does hard cider. Really worth listening to that one. I think he's genuinely Ikeuchi's son. I think he's a genuine cider boffin, a bit of a genius. And there will be more coming. So obviously it is Japan. So one thing we have to talk about is sake. So they're in the pipeline, some episodes about sake. I'm a big fan. Interestingly, you might be interested to hear that obviously sake is brewed throughout Japan, but with the highest concentration in the snow country. So Niigata has the most breweries of any place, any prefecture in Japan. Nagano, where I am, is number 2. One of the reasons for this is that sake is brewed in the winter because humidity causes problems with the fermentation process. So the colder and drier the climate, the better. And obviously a lot of those breweries also use the snow melt to produce their sake. Sake is 80% water, so really pure, clean water is really important. So look forward to bringing you that. And obviously there'll be more about beer and whiskey and everything else. No surprise, those episodes tend to rate well. There's no surprise about that.
Thank you again, Peter. Just so much for just setting aside time today. I know we were talking before we even started recording. I could talk to you anytime, but I truly appreciate you setting aside, time for the audience today.
Cheers, Mike. And if I can be any assistance in the future, please let me know. Really enjoy speaking. Cheers.
Also, this request is going out quite a bit early, but I really want to give as much of a chance as possible for listeners of the show to be part of the show's 3-year celebration next summer. For that reason, I'm going to start requesting audio recordings or written stories, like just an email, a fax, whatever it is that we could include in that episode. That could be about your favorite story from Japan. It could be what your dream of doing when you finally reach Japan, or just some things you've enjoyed about our show. So please send an email or an audio file to the show at lostwithoutjapan@gmail.com. You can do so at any time. I'm just going to be saving these in a folder in my Gmail. And when it gets closer to that time, kind of pulling them out. I truly look forward to celebrating this special event with you, and I can't wait to read or hear what you end up choosing to share with the show. If you've enjoyed today's show, feel free to support the show by joining the show's Patreon. Links will be in today's show notes. Thank you to our members who have already donated. You're helping me save toward microphones I hope to use with Peter this upcoming summer, and would love to, record some various sounds from Japan again and make some on-site interviews in the process. So on behalf of Lost Without Japan and the entire crew, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today for this interview, and we look forward to seeing you on board again for our next regularly scheduled episode as we continue our discussion on Japan, travel, culture, and your Lost Without moments. To everyone out there, O Genki Day. Stay well, my friends.
One of the more important accounts of the origin of Japan included in the Kojiki is the account of Amaterasu, the sun goddess and mother goddess of Japan, and her retreat from the world as I retold at the beginning of this episode. It is said the heavenly rock door, which had sealed her in the cave and was cast aside, eventually fell to earth in Togashi, marking it as a place of huge significance to the Japanese creation myths, a fact reflected in the presence of a shrine complex spread through the forests, enshrining many kami said to reside there. Kami doesn't translate perfectly, but in essence, it refers to divine beings or spirits, gods for lack of a better description, that inhabit the world and influence the human realm. They are part of nature and seen as manifest in natural features that inspire awe and wonder: mountains, rivers, waterfalls, ancient trees, unique stones, weather and other natural events such as earthquakes and volcanoes. These are all kami. Ultimately, the focal point of devotion in Togashi is the mountain itself, where powerful kami are said to endure. 5 shrines make up the main complex at Togashi: the Hokosha, lower shrine, Chusha, middle shrine, and Okusha, upper shrine are the most commonly visited. The smaller Hinomikosha, located between the lower and middle shrine, and Kuzurusha, nearby the upper shrine, round out the main structures within the complex. When approaching from Nagano City, you will first come to the lower shrine, with the middle shrine another 5 minutes by bus or around 20 minutes walk along the forest trail, located in the center of Togashi village. The middle shrine is the largest of the 5 and preceded by a large torii gate. You can't miss it. From there, you can walk to the trailhead of the upper shrine in around 30 minutes if you walk along the road, or around 1.5 to 2 hours using forest trails. The approach to the upper shrine is, without question, the most famous feature in Togashi, but not for the shrine itself. Around 15 to 20 minutes from the trailhead, the Zushimon is a large red gate which acts as the entrance to an avenue of grand cedars. With most estimated to be over 400 years old and some much older, the trees are immense and considered sacred in their own right. This spot is famous, highly photogenic, and attracts plenty of visitors. Should you then want to head on, the walk becomes a little more exertive as the level trail inclines upward and you tackle a series of large and uneven stone stairs as you make your way to the upper shrine. Another 25 to 30 minutes walk depending on your level of fitness. The upper shrine marks the place where the heavenly rock door fell to earth. with the ridgeline of Mount Togakshi running above, and as mentioned, a focal point of devotion in itself. Each of the shrines is dedicated to a specific kami or multiple kami, while the mountain, many trees, stones, waterfalls are also considered sacred, often marked by the shiminawa rope with tethered white paper as a sign that an important kami resides there. Forest trails link the shrines and offer the best way to experience the complex. Togakshi has long been a place of pilgrimage for practitioners of Shintoism and Shugendo, with the forest trails throughout the area still functioning as pilgrimage trails known as Togakshido. Practitioners of Shugendo are referred to as Shugenda or Yamabushi. Listeners to previous episodes of the pod will recognize that name Yamabushi, the mysterious ascetics who retreat to the mountains in spiritual testing, cleansing, and seeking their rebirth. As discussed in episode 9, How to Die Well in the Mountains, Way of the Yamabushi, in that episode, I chatted with Tim Bunting about his practice as a Yamabushi, so if you're interested to learn more, go back and listen to my chat with Tim, noting we discussed his practice on the Deiwa Sanzan in Yamagata, which is different to Togakshi, but in general, many principles are the same. Yamabushi continue to frequent Togakshi today. While it's possible to move between the shrines using local buses that run somewhat infrequently along the main road, I encourage you to make use of the trails and walk. Well maintained and suitable for anyone of reasonable fitness, trails should be free of snow from late May onward and stay clear until sometime in December. Throughout that time of year, I operate my tours in Togakshi, including walking the trails with my guests to the main shrines. If you're interested in that, listen on to the end of the episode for more information. Should you plan to go by yourself, trail maps are available at the Togakshi Tourist Information Center. It's directly across from the Chusha, that's the middle shrine, and is open daily from 9 to 5.